Good afternoon, everyone. This is Arif Qureshi. I'm the managing principal at ICS, and thanks for joining us again on the COVID Convo discussion and engage with our local school districts and superintendents. I know it's a Labor Day weekend, so I'm sure there's a lot of planning going on. So we will run through real quickly some of the key items we'll discuss today. We will be talking a little bit about, Fred will cover some of the areas around working from home accommodations, the new MD8 Department of Health decision tree that's been pulled together, and some of the routines I think we have to work through in terms of how we ensure that the kids are really trained and aware in terms of what precautions they need to be taking themselves. So self-management is going to be a big component of ensuring that we limit the spread of this infection. We'll also then jump right into the update from each of the districts who will be talking about how you get cooperation around masks, distancing, and what the first week of school could potentially look like. I know it's a challenging time, and I think we're all looking at how we ensure that we keep this thing moving forward in a real positive manner, I think. So there's a lot of positive hope, but I know there's also a little concerns about what the first week of school is going to look like. And then the schools will talking about some of the other specific areas that they're dealing with in terms of reopening schools. We also have Neil Carlson from the Department of Health, from the University of Minnesota, who will talk a little bit about the Department of Health decision tree, talk a little more about ventilation and filtration calculations that were developed by the University of Minnesota. I think that's going to be really valuable for your facilities department as it ensure that their systems are working correctly. And then Todd Rapp on the communication side. So that's our plan today. And then we'll, of course, question and answers. The chat function is open. So if you have any questions, please jump on that. I do want to address a few things before we move forward related to masks. I was actually recently in New York City on a business trip. And one of the things I noticed there was almost everybody was wearing masks indoors and outdoors. And as you know, New York City had a tough time, but their infection rate is extremely low at this point. And I even saw around multiple areas around the harbor, people jogging and running, and they all had masks. I actually got a chance to walk around a school facility that had a childcare setup, and the kids were playing outside, and every single one of them, these were young kids, were wearing masks. So they've done a good deal of, I think, training these kids in terms of the importance of wearing masks. So I think that was kind of exciting. The other thing I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about was retooling your schools as you go forward. As I was thinking about this whole issue with COVID, kind of reminded me of about 30 years ago, I was actually looking at a facility, I think it was Longfellow. It was a 100-year-old school in Iowa. I think it's right outside Des Moines. And it was interesting that at that time, somebody there, and they told me it was a farmer, had developed this ventilation system that ensured there was this large fan that was running with basically natural ventilation coming in from outdoors, bringing in 100% outdoor air. And he'd actually developed this matrix of ropes that were dripping with moisture so that he could humidify the air as it was coming into the building. So somebody had this concept at that time that fresh air was important, air exchanges were important, and humidity. And what are we finding? And one of the reasons was we hadn't discovered penicillin because penicillin was not discovered at that point. And if somebody got infected or sick, the chances were they would die. So what we are finding out today is exactly the same thing we should, 100 years ago in terms of more outdoor air, more fresh air coming in, more air exchanging, and making sure that you are running your facilities about 40 to 60% relative humidity so that the chance of the transmission is less and less. So again, I think some of our people about 100 years ago knew exactly how to ensure that we had a safe school environment. And I think we've come a full circle to ensure we continue to do that. And we're seeing a lot of school districts getting involved in that piece going forward. So I just wanted to mention that to you about the two things about retooling your ventilation system to how it should have been operating 100 years ago, and then also looking at ensuring that you really focus on this mask issue, because I think it will have a positive impact and reduce any kind of an infection within your facilities. So with that, let me pass it on to Fred.
Thanks, Arif, and thanks for your observations on ventilation. I remember when I was superintendent in Eden Valley Watkins, we had a 1922 building with a big sort of central airflow and plenum. There was actually more CFMs in those classrooms than in the 1950 edition that was put on with Univents. And so I think we're getting back to understanding the importance, and I'm looking forward to Neil's talking about that calculation. This is the first issue on the bullets here, is the request for work at home and for accommodations. This has been something that we've been dealing with now for nearly 5 months. And just last week, MDE came out with more complete guidance. But what their more complete guidance basically said is you need to deal with these things on a case-by-case basis. You can't make blanket statements. And right after that, they talked about if someone feels that they didn't get the accommodation, or you didn't thoroughly address the ability of them to do their work from home, here's where they can complain to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And then my wife, who's a teacher, gets the Ed Minnesota stuff, and they came out on Monday saying, teachers, if you feel that you have not been treated fairly here, call 1-800-ED-MINNESOTA and we'll be right there for you. And then yesterday in the superintendent's call with the governor and lieutenant governor and First Lady Gwen Waltz, arranged by AMSD and MASA, he was directly asked, what support will districts get for working with employees who think they don't have to come back to work, even if they don't have the need for an accommodation in their home? And he basically said, it's going to be some tensions. It's a local labor issue. We've had those issues in other industries. And then made a puzzling recommendation: people go public with their concerns. All I'm saying here is, you don't need the Department of Human Rights, Ed Minnesota, down your case on this. So you need to really be careful here. Hopefully in greater Minnesota, we have fewer issues than some of the city schools. You need to work your relationships here and keep this a local issue. Also, MDE actually put out a pretty darn good webinar on Friday on teaching new safety routines. I've not been able to find it on their website, but I do have a blog about it. And that's why I asked the superintendents to talk about it, because we do need to get students' cooperation for self-management so everyone can be safe. Because as the governor said, there's a lot of fear. People are scared about going back to work. I won't talk much about the decision tree because Neil will do that later. And also in the call yesterday, USDOE has extended the waiver to allow the summer school programs through the 2021 school year. And they're seeking further guidance. But schools that are in hybrid especially may want to look at this, because it means you're going to be able to serve meals to kids at home without having to do complicated counts and keeping track of free, reduced versus fully paid. And just a reminder that we have this information and blogs on an ENF Services blog on the ICS Reopens page. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our superintendents on these topics and from Neil. And so I think first one up is Tim Lutz.
Thank you, Fred. Tim Lutz, Superintendent of Bemidji School District in Northern Minnesota. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for this opportunity to share some more thoughts and about what we're doing up here in Bemidji. And just to jump into that topic that Fred left us off with the student cooperation and how we're working with students to try to get them to cooperate about especially masking and some of these topics that are sometimes perceived as being political when they really shouldn't be. What we're really working on and training our staff to do is to try to take a very positive approach through relationships. And that's very much what the governor told us yesterday about dealing with HR issues and dealing with them on a one-on-one basis if necessary. But rather than coming down hard and then making these issues like masking a hot point or a sensitive issue where students are going to want to rebel, through building positive relationships and through working with programs like PBIS or Responsive Classroom or CPI, working from a de-escalation point of view, where we are using intervention approaches and maybe even adding humor when necessary, because humor can go a long way. but to get students to work with us in a positive setting. We are looking also at educating and reminding people. I have a lot of community virtual meetings with parent and parent groups, and I'm always responding or asking them towards the end of my conversation with them to please work with the district and please work with all of us to remind students how important wearing masks is and to teach them how to wear masks responsibly and properly. Children will often reflect the attitudes of their parents. And so if we can encourage parents to work with us, I think that'll go a long way towards working with the students who are coming to our buildings. Also, positive peer pressure. We're working with student council and student leaders. We have a couple of student board representatives on our school board. And we're going to be, and we have been asking them to serve as student leaders and to recruit other students as leaders to model for their peers, to make it cool to wear a mask. And to remind them that, and I just had this conversation with people earlier today, masks is something, wearing them we have to get used to. We have to get used to wearing glasses. We have to get used to other things. Make it cool to wear a mask. Comparing it to maybe smoking in restaurants. Is it cool to light up a cigarette these days in an Applebee's or a McDonald's or anywhere? Absolutely not. And I think most people would be offended if somebody lit up right next to them in a restaurant. And that's the kind of attitude that I think we're trying to convey to our students. On the next slide, some of our first week's hopes and fears. This is interesting for us because the school board did authorize us to change our calendar here in Bemidji. So rather than starting on the day after Labor Day, the 8th, we're starting on Monday, September 14th. And I'm grateful for that additional time. One of the reasons the school board decided to do this is because of the ever increasing numbers of students in our distance learning model. And that has required us to do some shifting and pulling of more and more teachers from the classroom onto the distance learning team. Originally, we peopled our distance learning team with teachers with underlying conditions who have requested working from home. Now, as we see our classrooms shrinking a little bit or our pods at the middle school, we are pulling teachers from those classrooms to supply our distance learning team. So we will be needing the next 4 days to be able to work with some of those changes that we're putting into place. A concern that we have, and I touched on this earlier in the previous slide, is simply parents and students cooperating. And one of the areas is with our screening tool that we're asking parents to do every day, every morning, to work with the Skyward screening tool. And that's what it looks like. That's what the app looks like on our, if you download the app to a cell phone. You can also go to Skyward on a laptop or desktop and go into the screening tool and do the screening for each student. And it simply asks those two basic questions. But the first question, of course, has a number of symptoms. The second question asks about recent contact or recent testing and results. But we're asking parents to do that every day, and we're hoping for their cooperation. And we'll have to be doing a lot of educating and teaching and reminding over the first couple of weeks. I still have trouble remembering to open the app every morning to do it myself. So it's definitely going to be a lot of reminding. Staff member concerns, I'm anticipating hearing more. We're trying to answer as many questions as possible, but once school starts, what are some of the new questions, some of the new concerns about hygiene, about masking, about dealing with students, about dealing with parents, about all of these concerns. So I do fully anticipate a number of questions coming from staff members, and we're trying to anticipate them now so we can deal with them sooner rather than later. We're expecting more to come in over the next couple of weeks. Same with administration and staff following guidelines. I'm amazed at how many times messages have to be relayed and reminders have to get out in times of crisis and high levels of stress. When I think we've met 5 times and discussed a certain issue, I find out that a certain administrator or a certain teacher still doesn't quite get it the way I'm visualizing it. So I'm going to be patrolling schools quite a bit, visiting, trying to model, being available to answer questions and watching to see what's happening in buildings, because it's very important that we are consistent across the district and not let somebody be doing something differently simply because they don't quite understand the expectation. Bus drivers is also another concern. I met with several groups of bus drivers this morning and yesterday. We're having training meetings and calling them in for discussions. At first, there were a few bus drivers who were a bit, they can be sometimes a bit of a rough group, and they were questioning the need for wearing masks. But at every meeting I was at with bus drivers, they all had their masks on, and I thanked them. I reminded them of the need that we're wearing masks to protect others, not to protect ourselves, and that this is very, very important, and it's the single most efficient means of controlling the virus by controlling it at the source. So I'm anticipating additional bus driver questions and concerns once we get rolling. Getting back to the point of opening up on the 14th, something else that I think is a great benefit for us there is I'm hoping that I can find out some of these concerns next week that other schools are dealing with so that we can anticipate those concerns for when we do open. What's new in the Bemidji area schools? Not a whole lot, but our distance learning teams, I touched on that a few minutes ago, that number right now is not what we expected it to be. We figured maybe 400 or 500. We have 771 students as of yesterday. I fully expect that to get over the 800 mark and perhaps even closer to 1,000 in the next couple of weeks. So that is an ever-moving target as we continue to develop the distance learning team in the elementary. And the other concern is that with the middle school and the high school, we can't really have a distance learning team because it's one thing to have second or third graders who are taught by a team of second and third grade teachers across the whole district. But when you only have one college calculus teacher in your high school, you pretty much have to rely on that teacher to teach your hybrid students in class, your hybrid students outside of class, and your distance learning students. That 771 students is out of a total enrollment of 5,100 students, 5,100. So it's about 15%. So it's a school within a school. And what we're going to need to do is for these teachers at the middle school and the high school who are being tasked with teaching all of those students with the hybrid and the distance learning model, the big question now is, how do we find the time? And that's where we're scrambling right now this week and into next week, is to figure out one more way to support these teachers, because it is going to be a challenge for them. So staff members are asking for more time, especially at the middle and at the high school. So for us, our next steps are going to be to keep tweaking the distance learning team and what they're doing and adding people to that, but also to provide supports and more ways for teachers to have time. If that means an early out one day a week, we are definitely exploring that, or even a virtual day once a week. We're trying to explore that as well, because we know it is very important to support our teachers. So that's what we're doing in the Bemidji area schools as of this week. Thank you.
Tim, we did receive a question for you. Once they screen for wellness, if they mark no, is there a prompt to stay home or use the decision tree? Do you have folks following up on yes marks on your screening?
Yes, there is a prompt that does come up on the screening tool that does suggest that they stay home and that they contact the school for some more guidance, and that they contact, in the school basically will try to connect them with the tools and the help that they may need if they are questioning. But that is when that decision tree will come in. And if it's a relatively common symptom, like a runny nose that kids get quite often, maybe the recommendation will be to stay home for 24 hours and to see if that clears up, as opposed to a less common symptom that might be a symptom of COVID-19. But we'll try to get them help, and we will be tracking the responses every day and reaching out to these families if they don't first reach out to us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Superintendent Almos here from East Central Public Schools. Thanks for taking the time to join us and giving us the opportunity to share where our districts are. So for East Central Schools, how do we intend to secure cooperation in masking and promote safety with our students and staff? So I think the first thing that we've tried to really emphasize is the behavior and the attitude of the adults in our facility. We believe will strongly be mirrored in the students' attitudes. In other words, if we think this is what is appropriate and correct, then we think our students will do that too. So, you know, I'm sure every district is managing both sides of the issue. We have staff members that strongly disagree with masks and others that are strongly supportive. And we really tried as a district to say, this is something we have to do, and we have to make sure we're on board and pushing our kids forward to make sure they're on board too. And for those that are strongly opposed, we're going to have to fake it till we make it, right? Because this is what you know, is required of schools right now. One of the things our unions have brought up is the support from administrators about masking and with students. Very valid concern. What will our response be if we were, you know, to have ongoing issues with kids and masks? And the reality is we're here to support them. And because this is a requirement and things and what we have to do at school. As Tim said, questions from our bus drivers. What does this look like with social distancing and wearing masks? And are the drivers required to? So we've stepped through that with our bus company as well. We have a brand new transportation supervisor, so we're working through getting him on board and ready to go with all of these new requirements as well. So that's something we have to, you know, handle well, help him be able to direct the drivers to make sure they're in compliance too. You know, and I think a really important concept is empathy for one another. Again, there is strong feelings on both sides of this issue. Can we walk in each other's shoes for a little bit and say that we are in this together? And how do we make this go for students? And that really is the key, is we have to focus on the kids. What is best for kids at school, and how do we make that go? When it comes to masking, especially in the high school, we've talked through and making sure that our dress code applies to masks as well. If inappropriate masks are worn to school, what will our response be? And the reality is that the dress code applies. If we have kids and or staff members that refuse and just flat out refuse to wear masks and they do not have a medical exemption, what's our plan? And you know, we expect most of this to come in the high school. So we're talking through parent meetings. If there is a refusal, we will meet with the parents and try to see if we can get this to change. And if it does not change, we think the appropriate place probably to move kids is to distance learning, because this is a requirement for public places. When it comes to all kids, how will we sell this message? How do we get buy-in from the kids? And really, we're going to go back to our PBIS initiative district-wide. We've put together a masking presentation for our teachers to give on the first day. And really, it's down to why do we need to wear masks? Why some people will not be wearing masks. We think it's important that our kids know that right away the first minute of the day, because it'll avoid some really tough conversations and maybe potentially even some bullying situations. When will breaks occur? We've talked to teachers, we've talked to administrators about how will we schedule breaks with masks. For example, if an elementary teacher is walking their kids down to Phi Ed, on a nice day, can they take them outside and go around the building, take their masks off for a few minutes before they get them to Phi Ed? Those kind of things we're working through with each staff member. And we want to tell the kids about it through this presentation. And then lastly, we think it's important, to appeal to everyone's emotions too. Why do I wear a mask? Our teachers are going to stand up the first day and answer that question. They wear a mask for their family. They wear a mask for their spouse or significant other, whoever it might be. But tell the kids, this is why I wear a mask. I want to keep these people safe. Or, that we want to keep you safe as students. And so we have that presentation prepared, and we're really hoping to see positive results, just like we have with PBIS on any initiative that we take here at school. The first week of school, all of a sudden, here it is. I can't believe that the first week is coming on Tuesday. Wow. Our kids haven't been in our building for 5.5 months, but it seems like yesterday we were just trying to figure out what we were going to do with all this COVID business. But now the first day is next week. We are getting a little nervous here in Pine County. Our case rate data is growing. It has been low going all the way back to the middle of May when that data began. And this week's case rate data is 4.81. I continue to tell Pine County Public Health that when they get nervous, I get nervous. And I can tell they're starting to get cautious, and not quite nervous, but cautious. Next week, they're expecting our number to be 8.5. All of the counties around us are there or higher. So it seems logical that Pine County may be the next place that grows over that threshold. So really, our plans next week, especially in the high school, are to really look at what does that hybrid model look like. We also, probably like every school, are looking at that exclusion criteria and that decision tree. And I know that others are going to talk about that here. But we need to make sure we're ready right away on Tuesday. So we've looked at that decision tree. We've put that in the hands of people that will be making those recommendations and decisions for our school, for our kids and our staff, so that they're ready to say, how will we respond as a school? Just today, and we're working through communications so that we have those template letters ready to send. Those letters that we're ready to send home with families too, if there is symptoms in a kid. We can tell them, give them some direction about what to do. And of course, that exclusion criteria, we need to make sure we have our isolation spaces ready to go. Supervised well, PPE for the people supervising, and everybody knows where those spaces are. And I threw this in here about our first week. As part of my welcome back video we posted for staff, I really focused on opportunities, possibilities, and hope. We're at just really a tipping point with public education through this process. COVID-19 has presented us a lot of opportunities for growth as a school system. And I think it's important that we really focus on the positives here, because if the leadership and the adults in the building continue to focus on what the challenges are and perhaps some of the negative things, we're going to continue to spiral in that way. So we need to look at how will we be better because of this. And so we highlighted some of these points for our staff so that when they're talking to kids about why we're doing what we're doing, we can put that positive spin and focus on an opportunity, a possibility, or what we hope for. As far as the first week, just go back one, please, Aaron. I just included the picture there of our table shields that we put in. Hopefully everyone can see that. I just put it in there because as we look at the first week of school, it's kind of like the new learning environment for kids. This is what learning will look like for the foreseeable future. We want them here. We think the best learning model is at school, but we need them a little isolated. So the desks are far apart, shields are in place for kids, and that's what new learning looks like in public schools right now. So what's next for us? As our data grows, as I said, in our high school, we need to put the final preparations in place for our hybrid model. We believe that we're really close to having it ready to go, but again, we've been focused on in-person instruction for quite a while now. So we need to dig back into those hybrid plans and make sure we're ready, because we're anywhere from 1 week to 2 weeks probably away potentially from making a change. And we're really hoping we don't have to do that, but it could happen. So, we need to go back to those A and B schedules. Based on what we've learned now, is that still the model we like? One of the things we've overlooked for quite a while is getting our new staff up to speed. We've made some last minute hires. Do they know what our hybrid plan is? I mean, there's a lot of information on our website, but it also takes a lot of time to read it. So we need to make sure we go and have a personal connection with those new staff members to get them prepared. One of the things our union has brought up over and over again with us is technology support. We have drastically increased the skills of our educators, but they still need a lot of support. Just a couple of days ago, we hired a technology para in the high school to make sure that our teachers, when they call for help, that there is somebody that's coming to give them a hand. In the elementary school, I asked a few of our staff members this week, how are you feeling about reopening? Where do you think our focus should lie next? And I was just refreshed. So I had to put this in here because our teachers said, we need to focus back on instruction. What are we doing with kids? Because they've had 5.5 months without teaching. So let's get back to focusing on instruction. I just thought that was really refreshing because we as school leaders continue to focus on safety and just getting the kids here. But we have many of our staff members ready to teach. And I think that was pretty cool. Support the staff in wearing masks. Again, we talked about that a minute ago, but in our elementary school, we have to talk about that specifically, especially in the younger grades. In our elementary, we have a distance learning department. Are they ready to go? That's going to be coming up here. They have personally connected with every distance learning student, but really, are they ready with the technology and the materials they need? And again, technology support for our elementary as well. At the district level, communications, again, that exclusion criteria, we have to be ready. Prep our communications for the hybrid model. Again, form letters that are ready to send as soon as we make that decision. And again, go back to our website and update our plans, because things have changed since we first posted that plan, and make sure it's real-time information. I want to comment just quickly on meeting with union leadership. A few weeks ago, I put out much more detail in our cleaning procedures and safety and masking requirements and those kind of things. And the union quickly turned around and sent a survey to their membership about how they felt after my input was given to them. And of course, I was quickly a little bit questioning that decision to survey their members, but really it's led to a lot of positive conversations, because now we have the next layer of feedback. Now that they've heard from us with details, what are they still worried about? So we've had some very positive conversations with our union leaders to continue to dive deeper into answering those questions for staff members. And the most recent one are the amount of teachers that are feeling comfortable being in school continues to grow. So we're happy to report that. And that's back to those relationships and spending time with those union leaders. The next step with the district, we have to get into this custodial plans and communicate how we intend to clean and sanitize. Right prior to this meeting, our buildings and grounds supervisor and I met, and he's moving nearly all of his crew to daytime shifts so that they can clean during prep periods, get to those shared spaces during classes, and make sure we're sanitizing as best we can. In food service, our next step in food service is to talk through that hybrid model, because that's going to change us a little bit, and we're going to have to pivot some in food service, because if all of the elementary kids are at school and 50% of the high school kids are here, how are we going to get meals to their homes in that kind of a model? And so we're pivoting there a little bit to talk about how we intend to accomplish that, so we're ready. And overall, from the district's perspective, we have to support our new leaders and our new teachers, and make sure that, not only is it challenging to be a new leader and to be a new teacher, but now you have all this put on you as well. So making sure we're having those personal connections and personal conversations.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Dan Voce, Superintendent of Mora Public Schools. Glad to be with you here on this Friday afternoon. And we all have a tall task here, and we're all doing the very best that we possibly can to make sure that our students and staff and families feel confident and comfortable with coming back to school. Just talking through some healthy expectations. We've been communicating with our families all along. These are the things that we're going to be doing. We have a district newsletter that goes out weekly and emails all of the parents, and our communication team has done an outstanding job of making sure that parents are getting all the pertinent information. Of course, a lot of changes throughout the summer with different models and different decision trees and different expectations for masking. And so just keeping that communication out there. Our district nurse has done, I think, a fantastic job of making sure that parents understand what the expectations are about wearing masks in the school buildings, and then giving some tools for parents to work with their kids at home and how to help them feel more comfortable with masking. We had our open house this Wednesday at the elementary, and it was by appointment. And so one of the great things about that experience was I was able to see firsthand. We had all of our students, all of our staff, all of our parents, all wearing masks. And I don't think there was one person that wasn't wearing a mask. So even though there's a lot of controversy about it, I think that parents know it's important and staff know it's important for us as adults to model that. There are, of course, some medical exemptions for not wearing a mask. And so we did come across a mask exemption form that is really a useful tool. So if that is something that you're interested in, please reach out and contact me. Just like Tim mentioned, we do have a screening tool for parents at home. And we're making sure that we're teaching all of our students healthy expectations. Part of PBIS is teaching expectations in different locations. So what does it look like when we're in the classroom? What does it look like when we're out in the lunchroom? What does it look like in the hallway? What does it look like at recess? So PBIS is such a great framework, and so it's a great opportunity for students and staff to understand what it's like in those different areas. Okay, Aaron, I think you can go to the next one. And then I guess all of our hopes for a new school year is that we get off to a positive start. And I think positive start really means, as educators, you know, these are not new concepts, maybe just things that we have to refocus on, and making sure that, you know, as educators, and educators I mean teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, all of us are part of this team, and we have to be ready to be the lead learners and the models for what we're going to teach and work with our students. And we have to be, I think, more focused on the relationships that we build with our students this year more than ever, because there are a lot of uncertainties for not only students but parents. And so how can we develop, maintain, reinforce relationships and with all of our students and families, and that's going to be key to how well people feel about coming to school and learning. And as the lead leaders, we have to be innovators in what we teach and how we teach, and just getting to the fact that being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and whether that means wearing a mask or teaching in a different way, all those sort of things that come with this 2020 school year. Okay, Aaron. You know, I think the other superintendents mentioned, you know, there's going to be some great things that come out of this year and out of COVID-19. And there's examples everywhere within our schools and with our society. A couple of examples that I found at Mora Public Schools, we created this blue hour at our high school, and you probably can't see all the different things, but every other day we're going to an 8-hour block period, and every other day we're going to have a blue hour, more like an advisory period, where we're going to be teaching students different things that will help them be successful in this. We're in a hybrid model right now, so it's really important to connect with kids and make sure that, you know, they're feeling good, they understand what they're doing, and so it's that one adult that they know they can go to at any point in time if they need support. And so I just thought that was a great way that our teachers had developed this blue hour. We have a high school band teacher, and probably other schools have ordered like certain masks and different socks that go over instruments and things of that sort. Well, our band teacher took it upon herself this summer to make all the students in our band program masks, and she made the socks that go over these band instruments so kids could play their band instruments. And from the beginning of the school year, we'd have those things. And I know other districts are ordering them, but I mean, these are some of the stories that are happening in schools, that people are stepping up and figuring out a way to make sure that our kids have the best opportunities in our schools. So that's going to be a headline in our local paper. Yesterday we had our staff development training, and I walked down the hall and past our auditorium, and I heard this band playing. And so we had 4 or 5 teachers that were live streaming a concert to the rest of our staff. It was just a good break. And they were creating these new songs with COVID-19 and how we came back from school. So just another way that educators are innovators, are creative, and they're coming up with great ways to keep the morale of the staff great. So I think you can go to the next one. And I think the other things that we have to pay attention to is how can we support our students and our families, staff, and I think, as Andy mentioned, our leaders within our school buildings. But kids are they're going from distance learning to we're in a hybrid at the high school, and even if you're in person, it's going to look different. You're going to have plexiglass, you're going to have masks, you're going to have new expectations, you're going to be eating lunch in distancing, and athletics are going to look different at different times. And so all these changes, and how can we support our students? How can we support our families? Families want to know that they can send their kids to school and they're going to be safe. And what are the precautions that they're going to take? What is it going to look like for bus transportation, in class, outside of class, all those sort of things. So, and staff, obviously they're excited to have kids back, but they're also nervous and they don't know what it's going to be like. They're unsure, and that leads to stress, right, for all of us. And so how do we help support our staff? And we basically turned what teaching looks like upside down in a matter of 6 to 8 months. And so how can we be there to support our staff members? And the administrators, the building admin and guidance counselors, they're being bombarded with, students, parents, superintendents, MDE, MDH, learning models, changing models, decision trees, changing decision trees, masking, all those sort of things that building principals have to deal with on top of already being a building administrator. So we're just going to look really hard at that, and just thoughts on reopening. We just go back to trying to build confidence and trying to build in processes for changing learning models. I had to write down the different steps that I need to go through and that we're going to go through as a district, just so everybody knows what we're going to do if we change models and what it's going to look like. I guess this quote from Teddy Roosevelt really sums it up: and do what you can with what you have at this time. And just being able to be okay with where we're at. And I might reference this article, probably superintendents saw this come from Deb Henton. Public schools always rise to the challenge, whatever we've been faced with over the years. And I have the utmost confidence in our educators and our educational system and our fellow superintendents and school boards that we're going to be able to get it done. And so, and just reiterating that, when we have challenging situations, if we work together, we'll be able to overcome them. So I think that's it from Mora Public Schools. Thank you.
Hi, this is Neil Carlson from the University of Minnesota. Fred Nolan asked me to go through the Minnesota Department of Health COVID decision tree for people in schools, youth, and child programs. I will say they took a moderately complex process and made it even more complex. I think the first 2 lines that we go through are relatively straightforward as we go across. And the last line in the darker colors are where it gets a little bit more muddied. I will go through a little bit of this in detail, but I think we talked prior to this talk here amongst ourselves, and all were in general agreement that if you run into a situation where you're having a problem interpreting a particular step in this, it would be highly advantageous for you to go to your local public health official and ask them to help walk you through it to make sure that you're doing it correctly. I think if we take a look at the simplest case is for people with one or less common symptoms. So for instance, when I was starting out here, I had like a symptom I had. And then so you evaluate the symptoms and determine if the person is well enough to remain in the school. If they're well enough, then they stay and remain in school and keep monitoring their symptoms. If they aren't well enough, then they stay home or send home and consider evaluation from a healthcare provider or COVID test. The other thing I'd recommend on this, it's really pretty straightforward, is actually running through the symptoms checklist that's either at the Minnesota Department of Health or with your local healthcare provider. Because these symptoms keep changing as they get more information based on cases, I think that's probably a pretty good approach to take, because you may think you only have one symptom, but as you go through this checklist, you say, oh, I didn't even realize that this was something that was related to COVID. It looks like it might be something that I might have to deal with, so it request getting a test on that. And then in this chart as it goes on, return to school or program 24 hours after symptom improved. Siblings or household contacts do not need to stay home or be quarantined. So at the juncture on the lower one, the light green, that would want it where I would recommend taking a look at some symptoms just to make sure that you only have one, or that there might be some other problems. So let's go to the blue one in the middle. For people with one or more common symptoms or at least two less common symptoms, I would definitely at that point, stay home and then go through the symptoms evaluation checklist and see if you can be tested. And then it says sibling and household contacts remain at home or are sent home. And then it goes through a full list of other decision tree matrix on it. And then if you receive a negative test or an alternate diagnosis, then the siblings or household contacts return to the school program. And then you've got some other pieces that are going on there. So if you have the part here where you opt not to seek evaluation for COVID-19, and this is in the middle of the blue section, test from a healthcare provider, then you're staying home for at least 10 days from time symptoms started until symptoms improved and there's no fever, 24 hours without a fever reducing medication. If you can get tested, I would recommend doing it rather than being in a gray area. In some cases, they've been really restricting testing based on availability of testing. And so sometimes you will be put in that window where you have some symptoms, but they just don't have enough testing supplies. So then you have to follow that guideline. We go down to the bottom one. This is where it gets a little dicey, and they talk about close contact. And they said, get tested 5 to 7 days after last contact with positive case. And in this part where it says siblings and household contacts do not need to stay home or quarantine, I'm a little uncomfortable with that one. They said that, but I'm a little nervous about that particular spot. And again, I would ask guidance from your local health department. That's the note that's in gray underneath the blue right in the middle. And I think if you're going through this and you come up to a spot where you aren't sure about it, the bottom line is talk to your local health department official to get some guidance on it, because this is not as an easy one to walk through. The other items that came up that I was asked to discuss about it, and there are some links at the end of the program, and there's one that's related to the Center for Filtration Research at the University of Minnesota, and they have a dashboard that you can enter in the classroom size, the amount of ventilation you have, the type of filters that you have in the air handling unit, and it will give you some kind of idea about the capacity of number of occupants you can have in the space. And then if you want to play with the dials a little bit, you say, well, what if I add a HEPA filter? How does that affect it? Can I put in more people? How does it do with lowering viral loads? And you can keep changing all these different metrics in it. And the interesting thing that popped out, and it kind of goes to what Arif talked about at the beginning, is if you get really good filtration, you may be able to back off on some of the outside air because the filter's doing the work that the outside air is doing it. And that's really important for when we're getting into the wintertime and we're bringing in this air that has almost no humidity. So another way of doing the humidity control is, hey, we're going to recirculate more of the air, but we're going to use the MERV 13s to help take care of it and help clean the air. And I think that's a perfectly valid way to approach it. And using this model allows you to make those decisions. The last piece that we're coming through, and we've been doing more research on it, and it seems to be a real good method. So if we have students and they're saying, is the mask I'm wearing, is it a pretty good one, or will it protect others? And I talked about it this last week, but this is not all gaiters are bad, but this just happens to be a gaiter. If you have a mask like this, and you can go, and you can move the slip, you're not really doing a good job of protecting other people. If you have a mask, and you can put it really close to your face and it doesn't move at all, then you've got a mask or cloth protection device that actually is probably doing a pretty good job of protecting other people. When we've done this for several people that I've come across, they've been really shocked and upset that what they thought they were doing was helping other people. It's like Andrew talks about it. We're all in this together. We're trying to protect each other, and we're trying to do the best we can. Now, I'm not going to say you're going to police people. You know, if they can wear something that's appropriate for your school, that's fine. But if people want, through their own volition, decide, hey, I want to see if I'm helping out, protecting other people, this is a very simple method of doing it. Okay, you want me to answer the question in the chat about local HEPA scrubbers? I'll do that quickly. Local HEPA scrubbers can help out that. And if you go to that CFR research, it'll tell you exactly how much the HEPA scrubber will help out. One of the best things you can do for the HEPA scrubber is not have it directly on the floor, but elevate it slightly so you're not stirring up the dust that's on the floor surface, because that is one way to re-entrain the viral particles into the air.
I'll take a few moments and just talk about some communications advice to think about with the reopening. Once the schools reopen, you're going to be spending a decent amount of time, maybe a lot of time, on what I would call response communications. That is, you'll have questions coming in or complaints, concerns. You know, you think you communicate as well as you can, and you probably have, but there's just an immediacy to coming back to school that are going to get parents and students and others to start asking a lot of questions. So a few pieces of advice on this. First of all, make sure you've organized yourself and that you get some help. Superintendents, if you think you can take in every question that's going to be out there and be able to triage that yourself, my guess is that's not going to happen. And make sure you've worked with your district office team already and the rest of your administrative team, including your principals, so you can get some support so you're able to take care of some of the other things that you need to do. Support could include that triage function, making sure that the most important things get to your desk. It could include having some principals become specialists in answering certain kinds of questions. But try to organize this a little bit in advance. In addition, a little patience, please. You know, a lot of the questions you get are going to come from rumors that are around the community. That will slow down over time. And frankly, some parents just may not be sure what to ask from the beginning. And so, you know, be patient, understand that they have fear too, as we've talked about here, and that it is likely that over a week or 10 days, things will start to calm down in terms of the questions that you're getting. And that's good, because if you need to switch models at all, you're going to have to institute some brand new communication. I'd also advise you to continue to think about ways of building out and improving your communications. One simple way is continuing to expand your frequently asked questions. And I've got to call out to Tim and Andy. You've got great access to your FAQs. One click and people can get there. That's terrific. And I'd advise all of you to continue to build out your FAQ on your website so people can go there and they can start to learn. That's where they can get a lot of the best answers. I'd also suggest that every day or so, you send an update to staff members and give them some answers to a couple of key questions that have been out there, just so they're well equipped, because they'll be talking to parents also. And of course, once you have a positive case and contact tracing begins, you're going to have to make that a little bit more frequent, that communication with staff. The other thing is, I'd suggest that you sit down every week and make sure that one of the agenda items on your administrative staff meeting is to talk about communications and how you can continue to improve it over time. It will really help you if you just spend 10 or 15 minutes taking a careful look at yourself and looking at ways things can improve. The last thing I'd advise you is that as the month goes on, some of the communications you've been doing will begin to blend in, and the students in particular may not notice them as much. So I would say by the end of September, think a little bit about how your communications needs to adapt, so you're in a way reintroducing those messages to those students again. It could be as simple as moving the posters. It could be as simple as what Dan told us about, which is telling a few positive stories about what staff or parents and students are doing. Maybe we even want to engage some students to create a few videos that you can use, a peer-to-peer type of conversation. But just understand that if you're lucky enough to continue to move along with the same model and you're able to have in-school learning for several weeks at a time, the kids will get used to hearing things, and maybe the mask wearing will not be as consistent anymore. And so all you need to do really is reshape the communications a little bit to get their attention again. So that's my advice in terms of the communication side. For those of you opening up on Tuesday, best of luck to you, and reach out if you have any questions.
Well, thanks, Todd. And now we're to questions. And Tim, there was a question about your 771 and what percentage that was of Bemidji, and I responded that you have about 6,000 students, and so I think it was 11 or 12%, but you may be more precise than I on that.
Yeah, and you're pretty close. Actually, we would have 6,000 students if we didn't have charter or private or parochial schools. We lose about 900 of that 6,000 to charter schools. So our enrollment at the end of last year was 5,100 and change. So that's the number we usually use as a benchmark. And so that 771 is probably closer to 15 or 16% then, considering that.
Well, thanks, Tim. It didn't come up as a question, but I know you and Andy and Dan all talked about being consistent. And one of the thoughts from the MDE workshop on gaining cooperation was using the matrix in PBIS, as many of you mentioned, but also build a decision tree when you're working with those students who, for one reason or another, are refusing to wear a mask. So it's consistent. One of the suggestions they had was just offer a mask and ask them to wear it before you proceed. I thought that was pretty basic and simple, but put your administrative team together so that you're all addressing this consistently. I think people will be watching this very carefully. And so that would be one thing. Andy talked about having parent meetings, really kind of lay it out kind of very specifically. You're gonna have a parent meeting, how much time you're gonna provide, what's next. And it also said that, yes, distance learning is an alternative. And so I think keep that in mind as you move forward. Are there any other questions, Aaron?
I do not see any other questions at this time.
I
Okay.
had a comment, Fred, on what you're mentioning. There's a very good video out from NPR that just came out today, and I will forward it on to you, about the rationale behind wearing masks and also the science behind it. Extremely clear, well put together. It's only about 3 minutes. So that might be another resource the district can use to kind of help people understand it. But I found it to be one of the better ones put out.
Well, thanks, Neil. And, you know, kindergarten teachers do an enormous amount of time teaching kids routines about school. We need to realize that all of our kids and staff to a degree are like kindergartners, and we are too, in learning these new safety routines. And so all you've said about empathy and communication is all true. And you also mentioned the need for staff planning, and I can second that. Just listening to certain teachers that I know, to move to this new environment, especially in the hybrid at the high school level, where you're teaching both distance and in person, that they definitely need the planning time and support. So keep that in mind. And I know in your hybrid model, Dan, I think you're taking Wednesdays to do that, and I think that's useful. And Tim, you're taking another week to get ready. Well, I want to thank all of you and echo what Todd said, and wish both Dan and Andy the best, and Tim another week to get ready. And Arif, want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up real quickly. Just a few things. I think this is not as complicated, I think, as people think. In terms of, I'm talking about, I know the education part's complicated, dealing with people, but in terms of reducing the risk of exposure, it really isn't that complicated. It's actually very simple. This is something we deal with all the time in terms of, and Neil does, in terms of managing a contaminant, right? One of the key things you guys talked about is, you know, you at the source, you don't allow it to get out, which means you got to wear a mask. It's as simple as that. You wear a mask, and we've seen significant reduction in transmission by wearing mask. You reduce, you stop that contamination from getting out. If you can't, right, and it does get out, what do? You dilute it. And one of the ways to dilute it is to basically bring in a lot more outdoor air and cause those air exchanges, and you're going to reduce the risk. If you can't do that, filter it, right? If you can filter it at the source, which is better filtration or HEPA filtration, that's going to help. If it gets out there, and what do? You sanitize, right? You kill it once it gets out. And then finally, you know, if you can keep the distance, you reduce the exposure. It's complicated with everything you're doing with education, with dealing with people, but what you really have to do to stop this thing from spreading in your community is those 4 or 5 things. And I think if you can do that, you're really going to be able to continue operating your school and reduce the community spread, so you don't hit those numbers where you have to go through distance learning. I really think that if people manage this well, you're not going to have the issue. And as you know, most recently, Dr. Fauci also mentioned that same thing, that look, if you follow these guidelines, he's very confident that you can operate schools in a great manner. So I think those are really simple things to follow. Again, we will have this loaded up on our ICS website. There's a lot of resources to it, so please go and access it. The other thing I just want to do is thank all the superintendents and everybody that's involved in it. It's a lot of work, just so all of you know, that they put into it their own time to get this information. But I think sharing this information is extremely valuable as we're dealing with something very, very new, especially for school districts. So with that, again, thank you. Have a really safe Labor Day weekend, and good luck as you start your new school year. Thank you, everyone. Take care.